Gents, I just want to pause the episode for a moment to let you know about the Strong Men of Value Academy. You will have heard me refer to it a number of times, and I want to bring more attention to it. So this isn't just a program, it's a life-changing environment and community of men who are focused on personal and professional growth. We're looking at areas of relationships, wealth, and health, things to help you thrive and maximize your life. Imagine having bi-monthly one-on-one coaching sessions with myself, weekly group coaching calls, and an incredible brotherhood of high achievers by your side. Now we're diving into resilience, leadership, and holistic growth to not just succeed in your career, but to thrive in your health and your relationships. Your journey to greatness, it starts here. So join the movement and you can apply for the Strong Men of Value Academy. You can head to themanthatcanproject.com to find out more.
You know, and there were times over the years where I couldn't even afford to buy food.
Yeah.
So that was 78. So in 85 we bought him out and it was amazing.
Yeah.
Amazing. We played 6 Sydney entertainment centres. In those days you did a lot of shows.
Yep. Today we have a special episode for you. Michael Chugg is a well-known Australian music promoter and manager, and he is the manager of my wife and her band Shepherd, and he is the co-founder of Chugg Entertainment, a leading live entertainment company in Australia that has promoted and produced tours and events for a wide range of artists and bands. Chuggy is huge in the Australian music industry and has managed some of the biggest names in the industry, such as Elton John, AC/DC, Bruce Springsteen, and so much more. We have an awesome chat today, and it's a little bit different to what you may be used to. The first, I would say, 50 minutes, we get to hear some life stories of what it's been like over the decades, 5 decades in the industry, from Chuggy, and how he's seen it change, and just some personal experiences. And then we dive into more things around where he's at in his life now, things he would have done differently, and advice, which is, so valuable. And we could have kept chatting for literally hours, but we had to pull it up to go to a Christmas party. But I hope you enjoy this episode with Michael Chugg. The Man That Can Project podcast, a podcast empowering career-driven men to live more fulfilling lives. We are here to challenge your beliefs, redefine success, and talk about the important stuff in a relatable way. Don't forget to subscribe and leave a review. My name's Lachlan Stuart. Let's get into it. Chuggo, Michael Chugg, thanks for coming on the podcast today.
It's a pleasure, Lockie.
Mate, it's a pleasure to have you on here. I was actually going to fly down to you eventually, but get you in Stony.
Any chance to get to Brisbane?
Yeah, you've got you up for the Christmas party, so thought we'd do that, and we'll start off with a podcast, some serious chat, and then a few vinos later.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, well, I've been in training. I haven't had a drink for a few days.
Oh, really?
Yeah, well, I'm in the last year or so of COVID, I really, just couldn't be bothered drinking at home on my own. So I've got into a system where, like last week, for instance, we did Billy Joel at the cricket ground in Melbourne, so obviously I had a few drinks there. I didn't drink Sunday, Monday or Tuesday.
Yeah.
Wednesday we had the Chugg Christmas party at the Balmoral Beach, the Bathers. I drank a lot of champagne.
Celebrated.
And Thursday was the Frontier Chugg Entertainment Christmas party.
Yep.
So that was a fairly big day. And then Friday, Saturday, I haven't had a drink. So
just drying out a little bit.
Yeah, I just can't be bothered drinking at home.
Yep.
My wine cellar's growing immensely. It's very good.
Mate, we might have to get down there and sample a few.
because I'm not drinking it.
Give you a reason to. But you got started. So for those who don't know, Chuggy's a pioneer in the Australian and international music scene. Like, you kicked it off back in 68 when you were 15, was when you sort of was 16?
No, it was younger. It was earlier than that.
62?
I was born in, something like that. I was born in 47, so it was 62, 63. I had been, I've always been into music. My father fought with the Yanks up in the Solomon Islands in World War II, and he used to send the Yanks, my nan's fruitcakes, which were the best ever. Still, I haven't had anything like that. And they would send him the latest 33 1/3 records.
Yeah, right.
All the latest, the Goodmans, the Sinatras, the stage shows, My Fair Lady, Flower Drum Song, Fat Swallow, people like that. And, from the age of about 2, I was listening to all that stuff.
Far out.
And then my auntie got a hold of, I don't know where, and I never ever asked her, but she had every one of the original Sun Records singles with the hole in the middle.
Really?
Elvis, Perkins, Cash, Jerry Lee, all of them. And every Sunday when I went to Nan's, we'd play them. So I was really into it. I was a big Elvis freak. I saw Love Me Tender about 30 times. I was right into music. When I started high school, I started cycling competitively, and I was doing that. And one day they decided, amateur cycling club, obviously.
Yep.
In Tasmania, you played Aussie rules or you rode bicycles. That was pretty
the two
much
things. There was no other sports.
Well, you could be a runner or whatever, but Tasmania was a huge sporting town.
Yep.
And it was before any of the cricketers made the test teams, and it was a very young state.
Yep.
Anyway, they decided to run a charity, Queen, to raise money. So I suggested we run a dance because I was working part-time in a furniture shop where the bass player of the biggest band in Tasmania was working. So I asked him if his band would play. Well, the biggest band in northern Tasmania, the Hobart wouldn't accept that.
Yeah.
It's like Queensland, New South Wales, except it's in one state. Anyway, and they said they'd play, so we booked the Trades Hall in Launceston. I got my dad and all his fireman mates to be the bouncers. And we ran the dance and made £80, which in those days was huge. A few weeks before the dance, I was walking across a bridge on my way to some event down on the river, and this kid I knew had his transistor with me. He said, "Have you heard this?" And he played me the Beatles. So that was really exciting. I had, at the same time I'd started, because the commentator of the amateur cycling didn't turn up one night, I threw my hat in the ring.
Just started commentating.
Because I used to do it when I used to listen to the Melbourne Cup with my dad, and then I'd go out in the backyard and call it when I was like 7, 8 years old. So I was into commentating. I loved it. And, in the end it became, what am I going to do? Am I going to run dances? Or, I was running dances in Launceston, 16 or whatever, and I'm down at the cycling. So I'm running from about 2 miles from the city to the bike track, calling the races, going back to the dance where my dad's getting the shits because he's running it, and I'd only give him a couple of quid. So in the end, I had to make a decision.
Yeah.
I decided music was.
How'd you figure out how to put it all together, like your first show? Because you just randomly did it, right?
Yeah. I mean, it was just, you hired the hall and you sold tickets at the door, and it was pretty easy, simple stuff.
Yep.
But it was all brand new, you know. And then, so after I ran the first dance, I started managing the act that was a support band, and we started playing in Burnie and Devonport and Hobart, which was the Mecca, of course. All the best bands were in Hobart, and it was very hard for a band from Launceston to even get a gig in Hobart. Anyway, it went on, and different Melbourne promoters were bringing all the big national acts like Thorpe and the original Aztecs. They were actually, Billy Thorpe and the 60s Aztecs were the first band I ever saw live.
Yeah, right.
Blew me away.
What did you like about it?
Oh, just the energy and, the songs. They were a monstrous band. And a few months later, I saw Max Merritt and the Meteors had just arrived from New Zealand. And those two bands were really the heart and soul of a lot of stuff, because Max was playing soul music, which we loved. I mean, in those days, every Friday the new records would arrive from Melbourne at Allen's Music, and somebody from the band would be elected to go up in there and get all the latest American imports, like the Joe Tex songs and the Otis Redding songs, which were all on this American 45s with a hole in the middle. and they'd learn them and play them that weekend, basically. So it was very much, it was very much something I was really into. I'd watched the Victorian promoters and that when they came in, I'd watch them running the gigs.
Yeah. So that's how you learnt. You just watched.
Watched and studied it, and just it was all flying by the seat of your pants, basically. And occasionally we'd get run out of town, like Bernie. We had to fight our way out of the hall a couple of times with all the bodgies and fucking. Well, they weren't called Sharpies then. I started going to Melbourne a lot.
What's a Sharpie or a bodgie? What is just
like a skinhead.
Yeah, right.
The bodgie was like the Travolta look, right? Do you remember the bike? Right. And so that was early, and then of course the skinhead thing. And there were a lot of bikies in Tasmania. I used to go to Melbourne. I started going to Melbourne. I'd save up all my money. Dad used to hate it, and I'd go to Melbourne for a weekend. And you'd see the Rolling Stones on the Friday.
Yeah.
And you'd see Manfred Mann and The Who on the Saturday and somebody else on the Sunday and come home. And I used to do that, and I'd go. There used to be a big Australian show running at Festival Hall every Sunday afternoon that the Truth newspaper ran.
Yeah.
And all the big Aussie acts would be playing there, and I'd stand out the back of the hall and just watch what was going on. And you meet a few people like that. I met a group. I used to go to this club called 10th Avenue because I stayed at the Victoria Private Hotel in Little Collins Street, which was where all the cockies and farmers and people from out of Victoria stayed, right?
Yeah, right.
So, and this club was around the corner. I started going there. I met a lot of mods, and I started buying a lot of mod clothes. And a few nights in Melbourne, we were chased by the Sharpies around the lanes of Melbourne. But it was an amazing place in those days.
How old were you at this time?
17, 18.
Yeah, right. Still bloody young. Very young.
Yeah. And so I was spending a lot of time in Melbourne whenever I could. Whenever there was a big band on, I'd go over. And, I had a couple of local bands. One of them made the final of the Holies Battle of the Bands, which was a huge, monstrous event.
So is that like The Voice before The Voice?
With no TV, yeah. And Festival Hall, the final was at Festival Hall, and bands like the Twilights and Doug Parkinson would win it, and they'd get on a boat and go off to England.
Yep.
Which was usually a waste of time. But so I got a Tasmanian band, the final I went over, met more people. I think the year the Masters Apprentices won. Anyway, I decided I'd have a crack at Melbourne. I was managing this young Tassie girl, and one of the Melbourne promoters had seen her and thought she had a fair bit of talent. So I went to Melbourne, and I was planning to move there. And from about the age of 19 to 21, I pretty much was living there or back in Tasmania when the money ran out. But Tasmania was too small, right? You could only do so much. So I went into Ambo, which was the big agency where all the red hot acts, the Loved Ones, the Twilights, all those were. And there was this young guy sitting up the back, red hair, big nose, and it was Gadinsky.
Really?
Yeah.
Red hair, big nose.
I was, 19? He would have been about 15.
Yeah.
So we started talking, and he was an assistant to a guy called Bill Joseph, who was running the biggest dances in Melbourne at Glen Huntly, Town Hall, and all those sort of places, and Camberwell and all the Melbourne suburbs, Preston, Box Hill. And he used, he was starting to pick up on all these, the pop thing was fading.
Yep.
And Gadinsky started to pick up on, there's a band from Perth called The Chain. They were a blues band. Thought he'd moved to Melbourne and grown his hair long and started playing guitar at 560 decibels. And Max Merritt, who'd moved over, was a huge influence because he was playing pop and not pop, R&B and soul. So there was this new thing coming. Mick Rogers, this English guy, came out. He looked as though he was out of the Who, one of those mod bands. And he started a band called Bulldog. And there was another band came over from Perth called Healing Force. And they only ever had one hit. And you hear it on the radio all the time. It's called Golden Miles. Golden miles before you. And that was a monster. So all of a sudden, Michael Browning, who'd been booking these amazing clubs in Melbourne that were modelled on the famous places in London. One was called, there was a family from Macedon called the Knights. They had a lot of money. And on the corner of Spring and Street and Flinders Street, they built inside, incredible old building, they built this disco dance place called Prince Albert and Birdie's. Prince Albert and Victoria's. It was called Birdie's Bar, Birdie's Club. And they built another one up the road in another, quite a tall building, but quite not huge space, but called Sebastian's. So they were the biggest gigs in Melbourne. Then just down the road in Flinders Lane, you had the Thumping Tum. No, that was the Catcher in Flinders Lane. Then you had another one called the Thumping Tum, and there were hundreds of suburban dancers all over Melbourne, and there were other clubs in the city. So these bands, the La-Di-Dahs, I first saw them at Birdie's, they would come to Melbourne from Sydney, or they were Melbourne bands, and they'd do 3 shows on a Saturday.
Just back to back.
Yeah. They'd start off at the Thumping Tum. They'd go to Frankston or Dandenong Town Hall, then come back and do the Late Spot of Birdies or Sebastian's or the Catcher. And there were the Twilights who turned into a band called the Axiom. There were a lot of bands. Brian Cadd there were so many bands and so many such great music. And Michael Browning, who'd been booking these venues in Gadinsky, started an agency called Consolidated Rock. And for the first 3-4 months, they worked in the lobby of Sebastian's, and seriously, it wasn't much bigger than this table. Right?
Yeah, right.
They'd had 2 phones, and they were booking acts and started this agency. And I was working down the road. I was managing a band, but I was working at a soft furnishings warehouse, and it was just down the road in Carlton. So I'd go up there every lunchtime and take them their lunch and sit there and listen to them booking acts. And then they decided that it was starting to blow up. And Browning was managing Thorpe. He was blowing up. Gadinsky had got the Chains' first song on 3XY, which was a monstrous achievement. The song was called Black and Blue. And it became a big, big hit. And Melbourne was the capital of music. Sydney had been destroyed by people ripping off bands and running gigs into the ground. And Sydney didn't have a huge scene. So anybody with anything going on
was in Melbourne.
They moved to Melbourne. There used to be this place in Latrobe Street between Exhibition and Russell called the Greek Club. And every Friday night, Saturday night, after the gigs had finished, all the bands, the touring bands, they'd all meet there. Oh my God, it was
wild.
Fucking wild. There was a lot of booze consumed, hash, grass.
Has it changed? Because that was like the rock and roll.
Well, that was the beginning of it all, you know. They had, and Purple Hearts and all that sort of stuff. I mean, I didn't have a joint till 1972, so.
Still remember your first joint?
Yeah, I do. Well, but I remember the one that really
leveled you. We'll
get to that. So they moved to St Kilda Junction, and there was it's not there anymore. There was a house there, and we moved in there, and I was the poster boy, and I was managing my band, and I was organising all the posters for the gigs, and I had a van, and my lady, who became my first wife, we'd go out of a night and put up posters to make extra money. I mean, you did anything you could. because there was no money.
Yeah.
It was all about, it was just, Gadinsky used to run these gigs in broken down mansions in East St Kilda, Balaclava, which is actually the main Jewish area of Melbourne. And he used to called the Magic Mushroom. And they'd roll into these broken down mansions in the morning and run it on the Saturday night and get 600-700 people. Well, they'd get away with it for a couple of weeks and the coppers would close it down because it was all totally illegal, right? So we'd moved to another mansion. That went on for quite a while.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
You guys are like the first like entrepreneurs because from what you were saying, you originally...
Well, there were all these people doing pop dances and there was an entertainment industry, but it wasn't. It was all about, when pop died, a lot of people who were in the industry got out of it. It was very young.
Yep.
And, there was no such thing as indie records, really. Festival records in Sydney there was RCA, there was Festival, but Festival records, they had all the major labels.
Yep.
They all, like Chrysalis and A&M, all these labels went through Festival as the distributor. Festival was owned by Murdoch. And so they had about 20, 30 international labels. Jeez. And that's where Gadinsky first signed the chain. And then, obviously, after the first Sunbury, that's when he started Mushroom Records with the live Sunbury. The live Sunbury 3 days of music. And, it was an amazing time, and it was I was driving up and down the highway with my local band. I'll never forget, we got a big weekend of gigs at a place called Bus Stop in Newcastle. And I bought this reconverted Ford Ute with a back build on the back of it off Warren the Pig Morgan, who was with the chain. And we put all the gear in it and off we go. We get to Albury and the fucking van blows up. So we hired a taxi from Albury to Newcastle.
Far out.
To take us to the gigs. Fuck.
The taxi would have been stoked with that trip.
Yeah, it was a really hard weekend because, he was, but he was a pain in the ass to drive.
So you really got into the music industry because you just genuinely loved it.
Loved it, yeah. It was fantastic, It was fantastic. It was a great way to meet girls.
Young 17, 18-year-old.
Well, we were all the same age.
Yep.
And, and to meet, like, when Thorpe and Ray Brown and all those early pop bands come to Launceston, I'd managed to get onto the floor of their hotel when they were having parties. I was like 15, 16, 17. I was fairly fearless, but I was quiet and never offended anybody. Thorpe and I met very early, and then when I got the job at Consolidated Rock, he basically took me under his wing, and they were in the middle. They'd just recorded Most People I Know Think I'm Crazy, and they were working on the album called More Arse Than Class, and there was a marketing meeting one day, and Thorpe invited me into the meeting, much to Gadinsky's disgust.
So were you and Gadinsky mates at this point, or were you still just bringing him lunch?
No, we were mates. No, I was working full time there.
Yep.
Oh yeah, we were mates. I mean, his father hated what he was doing.
Yep.
And made him move out of the house. And Gadinsky lived in a converted garage.
Yep.
Outside the house. He wasn't allowed in the house. Food. And we used to go around there and play the latest Jimi Hendrix tracks. And he had 5 or 6 Jewish mates who he'd grown up with at school, and I was really the only non-Jewish person around at that stage except for Michael Browning. Anyway, Consolidated Rock was getting huge. We were running these amazing shows at Melbourne Town Hall. You had like Daddy Cool and these. There was a band from Sydney that had come out of here called Tully.
Okay.
And they were a monstrous band.
Yep.
In the 60s, early 70s. And we got them to come to Melbourne. They sold out the town hall in about 20 minutes. And there were bands coming up and down the highway all the time, playing shows like that. It was incredible. So the first Sundry, well, I'd gone to Sydney to open an office for Consolidated Rock. What had happened is, and Browning, these Melbourne Town Hall shows were great. So Browning decided we were going to do one at the Sydney Town Hall, and I went up with him to do it. And at the same time, we were meeting with a young guy who'd opened an agency up there about getting him and putting together Consolidated Rock Sydney. So up we go, and we've got Billy Thorpe and the Aztecs, the Lardy Dars, Piranha, Jerry Humphries from the Love One was the compare, Jeff St. John, the Ed, quite a few other, Freshwater, Leo De Castro and friends. Just amazing lineup of music, right, at the Sydney Town Hall. And the Nazi, and I call him a Nazi because he was, who ran the town hall in his little black uniform, and he just didn't want us there. So it was a miserable day, all day, this fucking prick. Driving us crazy. So we'd done the Melbourne Town Hall a few weeks before in Thorpe. Warren Morgan had played the Melbourne Town Hall organ, which was a huge event. And this weirdo hippie guy called Rodney Curry had invented this kinetic plastic blow-up sculptor.
Yeah.
Which, as it blew up, it knocked in Melbourne, it knocked all the gear off the stage. It was a disaster. But Thorpe insisted we take it to Sydney.
Yep.
So we get into Sydney, into the town hall, and as the bands are arriving, the first thing they do is they bring their sound systems in.
Yep.
And the sound systems in those days were columns. And you had two columns.
How tall were they? Just
6 foot, 5 foot. And you had a desk be a bit bigger than that, and that was it. There was no fold back. They were just columns today. Right? Excuse me. True. And they'd bring in their PAs, and then Lobby Lloyd, Wild Cherries, Coloured Balls, him and Billy would hook all the PAs together.
Yeah.
So that we've got this massive PA. They get it working. Eric Robinson, that was the day I met a guy called Eric Robinson who went on to run the biggest sound companies in the world. And him and his brother and their mate had this lighting company.
Yep.
But it was Sunshine milk cans, the big ones with gel across them and the lights inside. That was the lights in those days. So we're all set up, sold out. Lobby Lloyd's the first act. He goes on. He's overplaying. I'm down the front of the stage going, please, get off, Lobby. Come on, you fucking I won't repeat what I was saying. Anyway, he finally comes off. But as he comes off, he fucks with the PA, and it never worked properly for the rest of the night.
Just ruined.
Thank you, Lobby. Lobby used to drop a lot of Purple Hearts, they were called. Anyway, so it goes on, the show goes on. We're having lots of problems with the sound. And the Nazis getting really heavy, right? Curfew, 10:30 sharp. He's going to turn the lights on and turn the power off. And so we finally get Billy on at 10:15.
15-minute set, was it? Or
and we got this blow-up thing, so sure enough, the Nazi turns the power off at 10:30, and what freaked Billy out was sitting in the balcony at the town hall, right above the stage, was his nemesis, Johnny O'Keefe, who was the legend, right? In his white suit, and his perfect hair, sitting there watching all this going on.
Yeah.
Billy was freaked. Anyway, the lights go up and the power gets turned off and the crowd go nuclear, start throwing chairs. It was horrible. The little Nazi guy and his other guards went and hid. So anyway, it was a disaster. So in those days, there was a music magazine that meant something. It used to sell about 100,000 copies nationally a month, called Go Set.
100,000 a month?
No, a weekly magazine. What am I saying? It was a weekly magazine. It was the Bible of Australian music.
Yep.
There's never been anything
replicated.
The people who ran that got the rights to Rolling Stone, and for a long time Rolling Stone was very strong in Australia, but Go Set was the Bible. And Molly Meldrum was one of the young reporters there, because Molly was on the edges. He'd been in a TV show where they used to mime the hits. I forget what it was called. Anyway, Molly was at the show, and on the Wednesday after the show, the front page of the Go Set says, Rock Con at Sydney Town Hall. And Michael Browning just lost it.
Why is that?
Well, because Molly had basically said that, he just destroyed us. The Rock Con, right? Consolidated Rock. Yeah. Rock Con, I'll never forget it. And so Browning decides we're going to start our own rock newspaper. Now, we've got the biggest agency, we've got all the bands. So they started a newspaper called The Daily Planet, distributed by Gordon and Gotch in Sydney, and it was run by some of the roadies who were the tour managers of the bands who were smoking so much dope they didn't know what they were doing, and other hippies. And some of it was great, but it was a disaster, right? Yeah. It sent Consolidated Rock bankrupt. I was in Sydney with my new wife running the Sydney office, and basically it all went down. It went to shit. And they closed Melbourne down, and Gudinski went with our opposition in Melbourne, a company called Australian Entertainment Exchange, a guy called Ray Evans. He went there. Browning just continued to manage some bands. I was in Sydney. One of my roadies was a band called Company Cane, Cocaine. Yeah. was a guy called Roger Davies. So we started an agency called Sunrise in Sydney out of the ashes, right? And this is the year of the first Sunbury. So obviously, we're now not working together anymore, but Gudinski and Evans get the contract. The Sunbury was run by a Channel 9 producer called John Fowler and a young entrepreneur called Jim Mackay Jr. And they found a site at Sunbury and they decided to run Australia's Woodstock. So we had about we had about 7 bands on from Sydney. Thorpe and them were all Max. They were all in Melbourne, but in Sydney we were representing Piranha, Tamim Shah, the La-Di-Dahs, Company Cane. There was a band called Greg Quill and Country Radio that had a huge hit with Gypsy Queen. There was this hilarious band called the 69ers. So we had about 7 bands got booked for Sunbury. And I went down and obviously, Thorpe was blowing up. Bill Joseph had started Thorpe into the suburban pubs like the White Horse Hotel at Nunawading and some pub at Ringwood. And they were selling out every night of the week. And this suck more piss stuff had started. Where all the kids, suck more piss, suck more. And he'd play as loud as it was.
Bonkers.
Wow, it was bonkers. So we get to Sunbury, and there him and Max, and they're all camped on this little creek, all dropping acid and smoking hash.
Fuck, no.
And I was with a guy called Trevor Smith who had actually been the guy, he came from Western Australia, and he turned, when all this was happening in Melbourne, he turned 3XY from a shitty little station into the powerhouse of Australian rock and roll. And so I was with him there, we were there, and a couple of other people. I'd had a few joints, but nothing.
Nothing too wild.
Nothing worked. Didn't seem to have any effect on me. So the night Thorpey was on, Trevor said, "Come with us to our mobile home. We've got some of this stuff called Durban Poison." And there was a drummer called Paddy who used to play with the Twilight. Anyway, he was South African. He'd come back from South Africa with these little brown paper packages, about like my little finger, full of this weed called Durban Poison. So I went into the mobile home. We're sitting there, and about half hour before Thorpe goes on, we're smoking this weed. Anyway, my wife and I was all ready, Molly, everybody's there. We're sitting in front of the stage. In those days you had the square wire fencing, the old fencing. There was no barriers or anything like that, right? And you got the crowd out behind. They're all off their faces, drinking and suck more piss, and climbing up the sound and lighting towers, and there's red and blue smoke everywhere. Thorpe's built, the entire stage is covered in Marshall amplifiers. Half of them weren't plugged in, but it didn't matter. Anyway, I'm sitting in front of the stage, and he comes on. It's so loud. The crowd are going nuclear, screaming out, suck more piss, pushing the fences, climbing up. It was totally chaos, and the weed kicked in.
Not an environment you want that to happen.
And it was like I was in a concentration camp. It was frightening.
Yeah.
So I grabbed my wife. We ran about 400 yards to the car park, jumped in the car, and we were staying at a farmhouse about 10 miles from the site. Drove like a lunatic back to the house, and I was terrified. And I got under the blankets and didn't move for 15 hours. Fuck.
And that was the first time it really smoked you.
That was the first time weed ever got me, yeah.
We've all had those experiences.
That was amazing. So I went back the next day, and it was a fantastic festival.
Managed to didn't.
No, I was fine. I didn't have any more of that.
When was it that you and Gadinsky
got back together?
Yeah.
It was they'd started a new agency in Melbourne called Premier Artists, and I was spending. Roger and I had met an accountant called Philip Jacobson, and we bought the Melbourne agency that had Daddy Cool, Spectrum, Captain Matchbox, Whoopie Band. It was quite a and so we'd set up an office in Melbourne and in Sydney, and we were booking our own bands into Melbourne. We were basically the opposition to Gadinsky.
Yeah.
And because I'd started Eric Robinson, who I mentioned earlier, who was a production guy, he had a little Jewish friend called David Gingiss who went to England and booked the Fairport Convention, who were an amazing folk band, legendary still today. And also an unknown English pop band called Gary Glitter and the Glitter Men.
Gary Glitter and the Glitter Men.
Yeah.
Never heard of him.
Gary Glitter you've heard of. He was paedophile later on in life. Anyway, I started tour managing those acts because I've been doing that with local bands.
Yep.
And I started doing that, and Ron Blackmore, who was running Paul Dainty's Australian operation, saw me working, and he'd known me since I was just a kid watching him run shows, 8 years or so before and 10 years before in Launceston. So they were doing a big month called British Rock and Roll Month with Uriah Heep, Black Sabbath and Status Quo. And he asked me if I wanted to tour manage Status Quo, which I did.
Yep.
And so I was working with Dainty right through the 70s as a tour director. I did the Big ABBA tour, I did Bowie, a lot of huge events. But I was also, Gadinsky had broken he had skyhooks blowing into a monstrous act at the time, and I convinced him to let Dainty promote it. Him and Dainty never got on very well. So anyway, then Gudinski and Evans started this new agency around 75, 70, when it was 76. And they rang me and Philip one day. Roger Davies had decided to get out of the agency, and he'd broken Sherbet into a monstrous band.
Yep.
They were monstrous. They'd go and play 7 nights at the Perth Entertainment Centre, 6 Myer Music Bowls and 8 festival halls in Brisbane. They were monstrous. He wanted to go to America and try and break. They'd had a big hit with How's That.
Do you reckon there are any bands that big at the moment in Australia that could do that?
Oh, yeah. Oh, no. No, there's not. There's a lot of bands that can sell.
Yep.
I mean, Lime Cordial would sell the My Music Bowl out, so was Vance Joy and Tones and I. There's a lot around, but that hysteria that was back then.
It's different.
It is different. Anyway, so we started working with Premier Artists. I became a director of Premier Artists. A few years later, we expanded it into Sydney and called it the Harbour Agency and became Premier Harbour. But at the same time, I was still working with Dainty. I was also managing Kevin Borich, Richard Clapton, and quite a few local, Greg Quill, quite a few local bands as well. So there was a lot going on.
Yep.
In 77, I took Richard and Kevin to America. We lived there for 6 months, tried to break in.
Where'd you live? In LA or somewhere? Or?
Yeah, in LA.
Yep.
We lived in Agoura, which was the last suburb before the desert.
Why is that?
Now it's probably, it's a bit like Parramatta to Sydney now. Yeah. Well, because it was cheap and freeways and all that stuff. But anyway, so I did that, and I was still doing Dainty, and Dainty would fly me home to do Bowie and stuff. I was making a lot of money doing those tours, Paul, because in those days the deals, you bought an international act, you paid their airfares, you paid them a fee, you looked after them.
Yeah.
But unlike today, they don't walk out with 90% of the profit. Right. So Dainty was making a lot of money, so he could afford to pay us all really good money. So I'd come back and do those tours. Anyway, come 79, I was in London with Kevin Borich, 78. I was in London with Kevin Borich. We were recording an album. And one night Kevin took me to a club called the Lyceum. And we saw The Police. I'd never seen anything like it in my life. At the same time, there were all these bands blowing up, Elvis Costello and the Imposters, the Specials, The Clash, Madness, all these bands blowing up in England. It was exploding, Reckless. Yeah. It's sort of the Sex Pistols that started it, but it had become, really good music. Squeeze, Reckless Eric. There were so many of them. The Pretenders. So I came back to Australia and I went to Dainty and said we should start touring all these young English acts. And he basically said, I'm not touring that East End scum, because he was always a bit of a West End snob.
Yep.
So the following weekend we had a directors meeting at Premier Artists, and I said, Gudinski just got off a plane from London. I said to him, listen, I think it's time we started our own touring company because of all this
stuff going on.
Stuff that's going on in England. Anyway, he had this old Gladstone bag, beaten up Gladstone bag he used to carry all around the world with him. And he smiled at me and he opened the Gladstone bag and he had all the publishing contracts for all those bands.
Did he?
Yeah, every one of them. He'd got tight with these guys who owned, what's the name of the record label? Oh, well, Chrysalis was one of the labels, but there was another one. What's it called? It was a mad name. Thick Records? No. I can't remember. It was a huge label in England, and I'm sorry.
That's right.
It might come to me in a minute. Anyway, he had all the publishing contracts. And he'd come home via New York where he'd met with Ian Copeland, who was the brother of Stuart Copeland, who was in the police. And the other brother, Miles Copeland, who I'd met earlier when he was managing Wishbone Ash, which was one of the acts I did with Daney. Anyway, that was the police thing. And Ian had opened, and they were born, their father was a major CIA player,
Right.
and ran Beirut in the Middle East.
Is that why they called themselves the police? Or
No, well, yeah, but it gets better. And these kids grew up in all those foreign lands.
Yeah.
So Ian started an agency in New York, which became the biggest agency in the world. And it was called FBI, Frontier Booking International.
Yeah.
And so we called out, we started this touring company. Ganinsky had been via New York and was talking to Ian about, it's amazing how we were actually both thinking the same thing.
Yeah.
So he said, well, yeah, we're going to call it Frontier. So away we went. And first two tours was Squeeze and Police. And when the police was here, I was on the road with Dainty doing the second Fleetwood Mac tour, which wasn't that successful. And Dainty nearly assassinated me with a bottle of red wine at the end of the tour in Christchurch.
Because you were losing money, or?
Well, no, he was getting hassled like crazy by Fleetwood Mac's tour director.
Yeah.
He'd say to Paul every day, how does it feel that your roadie is running the biggest tour of Australia with the police? Dane had lost it. And Paul and I talked, but that was it. So we started Frontier, and that's...
How did that feel, though, for you, obviously starting Frontier with Gadinsky and then touring those big age acts?
Well, we did, we did a lot of the new wave stuff.
Yep.
And because Michael was travelling all the time in America, because he was in America a lot.
Yep.
He was trying to break JoJo Zepp, the Sports, Split Ends.
Yep.
Split Ends, they got so close and they broke up. Anyway, he was always in America. So his network of people in America was growing immensely. I still can't think of the name of that label. Skin Records? No, I'll think of it. But his network in America was growing immensely. So all of a sudden, we're looking at touring Neil Young, who'd never been to Australia. Bob Dylan, who hadn't been there since the 60s. So all of a sudden we're going from these punk bands, and we'd built the police into us. We were doing stadiums in 83 with the police.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. We played Lang Park, places like that. So we built these bands from clubs and 2,000 seaters into stadiums, and it was quite incredible, really. And then so we got Michael secured Neil Young, and it was incredible.
What do you think was important behind building them from 2,000-seater to stadiums?
Well, that's, you brought an act in. Like the first time we brought the police, we did the Capitol Theatre, we did Festival Hall here in Brisbane, and you just built it. And that was always sort of the process with our own acts. You'd start off I remember, Sherbet came to Melbourne and everybody in Melbourne's laughing at them. They're playing to 200 kids at the Oakley Town Hall.
Yep.
And 6 months later, they're selling out 8 Melbourne Festival Halls in Melbourne. So that was the procedure. I mean, I remember with Gary Glitter, Scrooge Madigan, this famous roadie, and I was sitting on the side of the stage at Festival Hall the night Gary Glitter played there. And we were smoking hash. And he came out on a motorbike. The lights and everything. And there was only about 1,200 people in the hall. We brought him back 6 months later, and I came up with the idea of Gary Glitter is July.
Yeah.
So we had the calendar of July with Gary Glitter exploding through it. We did 4 Brisbane Festival Halls. We did 5 Hordern Pavilions in Sydney, 6 Melbourne Festival Halls, and played outdoors in Adelaide and Perth. He'd been unknown.
Yeah. Until that
6 months before. And at this stage he had 3 or 4 songs in the top 10, and He was amazing, but he turned out to be one of the Rolf Harrises and Jimmy Saviles and Gary Glitters. You can name them all together. Anyway, so getting back to where we were at, we brought out Neil Young, and I'd grown up. Like, Harvest was the soundtrack to my first real love, my marriage and everything. And I'd grown up with Neil Young. He was amazing.
Yep.
Amazing. And, in 1978, I had to deliver we'd done Rock Arena with Fleetwood Mac, Santana, a Little River Band and Boris. And I had to deliver a commemorative plaque to Bill Graham's office, who was the legendary American promoter.
Yep.
He managed Santana. And I had to deliver this plaque. So I get into San Francisco. I'm staying in one of those expensive hotels up on the hill.
Yeah.
And I'm reading through the local rag, and Neil Young is playing at this club just down the hill, and they're recording an album called Rust Never Sleeps. So I thought, okay. So I wandered down, and I walk up to the door, and the woman says, it's only holds 300 people. They got the recording trucks out the front of me. And I said, look, my name's Michael Chugg. Work for the biggest promoter in Australia. I'm here. I'm seeing Bill Graham tomorrow and everything, and I didn't know this was on. So she took pity on me and let me in. And here I am sitting, and they had long tables, and it was basically a wine.
Yep.
Forget what it's called. A wine place.
Tasting.
I'm sitting there drinking sangria, and here's Neil Young walking around the stage, and he's got all the Indian drugstore statues on the stage, and he's wandering around singing, hey, hey, my, rock and roll is not forgotten, Johnny Rotten and all that, and I'm just sitting there thinking, wow. So that was 78. So in 85 we brought him out, and it was amazing.
Yeah.
Amazing. We played 6 Sydney Entertainment Centres. In those days you did a lot of shows.
Why do you think that's changed now, or has it changed now?
Well, yeah, it has changed. I mean, I remember Dire Straits did 21 nights at Sydney Entertainment Centre. And we had Sting, Dream of the Blue Turtles for 2 nights on Dire Straits' nights off. And Sting's up on stage thanking Mark Knopfler for letting him use the hall. And Billy Joel, we did 12 shows at Sydney Entertainment Centre, 6 nights at Brisbane, Boondall.
Yeah.
It was huge. And but the bands would come here and they would sit here for weeks. It doesn't work like that anymore. It's all so expensive now, and it's all down to timetables.
Whatnot.
I mean, we did Billy Joel a couple of weeks ago at the MCG. We had 78,000 people because he's crossed the line, right?
Yeah.
But if you brought him in and did a normal tour, you might get 2 Brisbane Entertainment Centre.
Yeah.
You might get 2 Rod Lavers. But to do a huge one-off at the MCG, and 48% of the people come from all over Australia. So that's sort of where it's going. It's like these acts cross the line. It doesn't matter. Like Billy Joel's opening words at the MCG was, I got some good news and some bad news. First of all, I'd like to apologise. I haven't written a new song since 1987.
Jesus.
The good news is I'm going to play everything. And for 3 hours he played fucking hit after hit after hit. It's like Elton John. We did that Farewell Yellow Brick Road tour, which we're reprising or whatever you call
at the moment.
Shortly. And we went to Bathurst 2 nights.
Yeah, he did all the regionals, right?
2 nights at the Sunshine Coast.
Yeah. That's
at the footy ground. And we went to Bathurst and Wollongong and
Why did he do that instead
of... he just wanted to do it.
Yeah.
Let's do as much as we can. He used to come nearly every year.
Yep.
And the trick was you wouldn't play the same cities.
Yep.
And Keith Bradley there, his tour director, who was actually, I first met, he was the sound guy on ABBA in 77. He'd have a huge map of the world on his, when they were on the road in America, he'd have it on the wall, and they'd have little red dots everywhere he'd played in the world, and a big map of Australia there, and he'd go, what's there? Oh, there's a little town there, and we just...
Play it.
Yeah. Like on this tour coming up, we're doing Suncorp, it's sold out. We're doing 2 nights at Allianz in Sydney, sold out. 2 nights at Amy in Melbourne, sold out. And we're honouring the postponed shows in New Zealand. Keith rings me and says, we need one more show. It's like, oh, for fuck's sake. Where are we going to go? So I'm looking... I've got the, every so often he'll send you the 231 shows Elton's done in Australia. Their documentation's incredible. So I'm sitting there and I'm looking through the list and I went, I'm looking at the Hunter Valley and I thought, geez, we've played there a lot. Never played Newcastle. Okay. So I rang some friends in Newcastle and I quickly discovered that a lot of people who live in Newcastle don't go to the Hunter Valley, even though it's only an hour away, right? So I rang Keith and I said, I think I've worked it out. So I didn't want to go back to camp. I didn't want to go where we'd been.
Yep.
So we did they rebuilt the stadium in Newcastle, so it made sense. For the first time ever and the last time ever in Newcastle, Elton John. We sold 30,000 tickets the first day. Jesus. And it added a second show. Because we'd looked, and worked out the Hunter Valley and Newcastle are not the same place.
Yep.
Definitely not. So that's sort of, that's Elton. Incredible.
So you've grown a lot with all of these artists as well. What has it been like watching them develop and even your own career develop over the years?
Yeah, well, it's developed my career, and in the early 80s I was managing the Church, the Sunny Boys, Jimmy and the Boys, a lot of huge acts. And both the Church and the Church went on about 2 months after I decided not to manage them anymore. They had a number 1 worldwide hit with Under the Milky Way Tonight. The Sunny Boys were so close breaking in England, and the guitar player had mental health problems and the band basically broke up. So I decided I wanted to get married for the second time. Frontier this is 82, 83. We're really blowing up. It's pre-Neil Young and Billy Joel and all those, Bon Jovi. And I wanted to focus on Frontier, so I got out of management. But I was always a huge supporter of Australian music overseas. Yep. I mean, I've watched Michael pour millions into trying to break Australian music overseas.
Why do you think it's important to break it overseas? Or is it important?
Well, yeah, it's important because they can't keep working round and round here.
Yep.
But, and we watched so many bands like Daddy Cool. They were monstrous. This hype merchant in America, Kim Fowley, took them to America, and they were the toast of the town. But the problem was they'd been working so hard and for so long in Australia that magic, that will had gone. And the same when Cultures went, the magic had gone. They just weren't the same live bands. They'd worked themselves to death here.
Yep.
And, it started to change. Split Enz were that close to becoming a huge band worldwide, and they split up. And out of all that came Crowded House. And that deal was done worldwide.
Yep.
So that it was all fresh worldwide. It wasn't an Australian band who'd worked themselves to death, were now had kids and were married, and they really didn't want to schlep around America, which you had to do for a couple of years.
Yep.
So it just wasn't, and it was so far away. You'd save up all your money, you'd go to America, and He got close a few times, but no, it was really started to change with Crowded House, and then the Hoodoo Gurus and a few other bands started to break through because they were virtually, and that has become the blueprint. You know, when I decided to get back into management after Baruka drove me crazy about the Shepherd Kids, and Brian Brown was driving me crazy about the two Northern Beaches brothers. Yeah. And I decided to get back into managing, and because I felt at the time, 10 years, 11 years ago, that Australian music was definitely going in the right direction. And there had been moments. Savage Garden were huge. Ice House had a moment. There'd been a lot of moments. The Angels went to America, changed their name to Angel City and got that close. There were moments. So it was like, yeah, okay, I'll start again. But when I started again, it was based on if we're going to do this, we need to do it worldwide at the same time, because otherwise it's not going to happen. And we are definitely not signing with a multinational in Australia.
Yeah. Why was that?
Because they pitch you the big worldwide deals and give you a few grand, and then they can't get anybody overseas at their own companies to release your music. And it's still happening to acts. So it was very important. So I said, fuck it, let's go around the world. So we went and played a festival with some friends of mine, big one outside of Johannesburg. Yeah. We played a friend of mine's festival in Oxford, a couple of days there, and then we went and played Central Park gig, 4,000 or 5,000 people, and then Sat Bislam, my mate in LA, ran a show at the Viper Room.
Yeah.
And we had the EP, and we went and played in boardrooms in London, and, you know, I mean, and they were a lot better than when I finally gave in and they came to Sydney and performed in the back room at the offices in Crown Street. And they were so nervous, sweating.
Yeah.
And this is well before Emma could play bass or anything. And, you know, I had Susan Heyman and all these ears in the room, because it was either going to be, they were either going to like it or they were going to hate it. And at the end of it, Susan said to me, gee, those harmonies are different. It's got this Pacific thing going on, which is Baroque, obviously. Yeah. So that was the beginning of Sherbet, I keep calling Sherbet. Every now and then I call him Sherbet, right? Anyway, but it was about getting it going, and finally we got a distributor for the EP in America, and started to get some movement. Decca were making noises about signing us for Europe and England, in London, not in Australia. And then Lime Cordial, Brian Brown was driving me crazy, so I went to the Bears Den at the Metro in Sydney one night to see these two boys, and the room was full of 160, 170 of the best-looking 18-year-old kids you've ever seen in your life, all going nuclear. So that was the beginning, but it was all based on, you know, trying to break it worldwide.
Why? So you're 75 now, yeah? So most people are pulling up stumps at like 60, 65 and enjoying, but you're still so passionate about it. What keeps you driving in the industry?
Well, I mean, the biggest, standing out near the mixing desk at the MCG the other night, watching Billy Joel sing songs that are 40 years old in front of 78,000 people, and the joy that is being in that room. Yep. That's magic. You know, going to Rock and Rio with Shepherd, and even though somebody had stolen the fucking iPod and we didn't have any tracks, but standing on the side of the stage watching 200,000 Brazilian kids singing every song, that's an incredible thing. And it just keeps me going. And it's not about the money. The money was always, my attitude to the money, and Dad used to hate me for it, was if you do something properly, the money will come. And there were times over the I couldn't even afford to buy food. I remember one night in Sydney when the whole Consolidated Rock Daily Planet thing was going on. This guy used to put up a poster that said he could buy a pound of pot. So we put our last money into this pound of pot, and then the idiot cut it with oregano. So he couldn't sell it. Oh, God. So there, I remember times when we were down and out and didn't have anything.
Yep.
But if you believed and you kept working and believing in stuff, I mean, I don't know when I started saying it, but, I said to a lot of people, probably the last 40 years, if you keep banging your head against the wall hard enough, the wall will fall down.
Yeah.
And it does. It does every time. I get frustrated that there's still a long way to go.
Yep.
And it's been a huge learning curve internationally. But with the management and recording thing, I mean, we've learned lucky that I've had some great mentors like the late David Enthoven, who managed, started off with Roxy Music and all those bands.
Yep.
Take that, and then Robbie. And he's one night in Finland, in Helsinki, while Robbie was on stage, he sat in the dressing room with me because he knew, what I was doing with Shepherd and Lime Cordial. And he told me all about neighbouring rights and airplay and the money. We'd never heard of any of that shit. I remember that we didn't even know what APRA was, except we knew that we could, if you put a band on with one of the big internationals, you'd get a piece of the gate of the APRA money. But we didn't really understand. And it was, I think it would have been 78 when I went to APRA and got $40,000 advance for Richard Clapton. And we started to work out, and then sitting with someone like David Enthoven, and he lays it all out for you. And I've been very lucky. So, during COVID, it was all about you need to learn how to perform on the internet.
Yep.
You need to start working your fans. And if you look at Shepherd and at Lime Cordial and a few of the other acts, they all actually grew
through that
during COVID without being able to work on the road. And the income streams were still there.
Yeah.
So it's been an incredible learning curve, and you never stop learning. There are some people in the industry that are older than me, believe it or not. I think I'm lucky that I wanted to get married in 1983 and went to a health farm and learnt moderation.
Moderation.
Well, I went to Camp Eden, and I went for 6 weeks. And after a couple of weeks there, I suddenly realised that music had become my entire life.
Yep.
I didn't know how to talk to normal people.
Yep. I
didn't, and it was like it just changed me, and you learnt moderation.
Yep.
And it's like we were talking earlier about, I'm going to have a few drinks at the Shepherd party tonight, but I haven't had any for 48, 56 hours.
Yep.
So, I had a post-COVID, I went and saw my doctor. He's an 80-year-old Chinese Australian doctor.
Yep.
And I go on, I get all the blood tests, and we do. He can't believe that I have pristine blood pressure. I've never had high blood pressure. Anyway, we do all the blood tests, and he rings me up, and we're reading everything. Triglycerides are fine, the cholesterol's fine, the blood sugars are fine. And at the end of the rave, he hasn't mentioned my liver or my kidneys. And for years, they were the two things that he would say, oh, your liver's a bit stressed and your kidneys are a bit swollen or whatever, right? I said, you haven't talked to me about the liver and kidneys. Are they that bad? He said, no, they've been reborn. So I trace it all back to the reality of going to health farms and trying to stay fit
Yep.
and trying to be moderate in
Your approach with things.
And COVID, I mean, you couldn't sit at home getting drunk every night. I gave up smoking marijuana about 12 years ago. I just, we used to work on it. When we were kids, we'd go into the Consolidated Rock and we'd sit there and get stoned all day and book the biggest bands in Australia. But about 12 years ago, I went, I can't do this anymore. It's pointless.
What would be one bit of advice you would have given your younger self?
Well, to believe in what you're doing and to be honest was always, you've got to be honest with people.
Yep.
I used to be a pretty good liar when I was a kid.
Yeah.
But as you get older, you realise that you're just lying yourself into deeper shit.
Yep.
And honesty and sincerity is really what it's all about.
Yep.
If you've got a fucking problem, if you've fucked something up,
just bound to happen.
You just tell the truth.
Yep.
I fucked it up. Well, I fucked something up the other day and I just come out and said, I'm sorry. I fucked this up big time. So you got to be honest with everybody. And, when I was younger in the 20s and even into my 30s, I would scream and yell at everybody to get things done and perfect as possible. Now I do it by being a nice guy.
I've seen you, I think the first time, or one of the first times I would have met you back in 2014, just to get the crowd shut up. Fucking shut up.
Oh, yeah. Well, you learn to do that. I learned to do that in the 70s in Melbourne at Festival Hall and places like that, where, you'd have all these 14, 15-year-old kids would come screaming into the hall, and by the time you started the show, you had 1,000 of them out on the back road. So
had to whip them into line.
Well, it was like you'd open the doors and this booming, and I'd started to play security all over them so they could slow them down. And I'd get on the microphone and say, "Stop running."
Yeah.
When you get to the front of the stage, sit on the fucking ground. They started to work it. They worked it out, what it did for them. It saved them. And so by the time the main acts came on, they were still fresh and they could cross themselves to death during the main act.
Yep.
Not even before the bands had started, which is what. So that was just something I did. And over the years, a lot of people adopted that. I remember I got a call from Barcelona one night. A Aussie friend, had just been to the bull ring and seen the police. And he said, You're in Barcelona. I said, "No, I'm fucking not. I'm in Sydney." He said, "I just heard you at the police concert." Just telling everybody to stop running.
Fucking hell.
They taped it and they took it around the world. Billy Joel did the same thing.
That's fucking awesome.
Yeah.
It must make you pretty proud of yourself for what you've given to the industry, and even what you were saying when you stand side of stage and you get to see, because of the work that you're doing, the memories that people get to create with their families and loved ones watching live acts is pretty impressive.
I mean, it really is, and I try. I wrote that book, Hey You and the Black T-Shirt.
Yeah, I've read that. It's a cracker.
Amanda Pellman drove me crazy, and she talked to writers and people for a couple of years. Then we found Ian Shedden, who unfortunately died a couple of years ago, or we would have done another book, and he captured my voice.
Yep.
And the book actually sounds like me.
Yeah.
And that's why there is another one, because I'm not going to do it with some of these other writers who want. It's not even about the money. It's about. It's not. It's not going to be me. And with Ian, it was. We started off doing it here, then we went and sat on the beach in Phuket for 2 weeks, and it was done.
Yeah.
But there's a great book coming when I die, because there's like 200 edited pages that we couldn't use.
Fuck yeah, that'll be special.
Yeah, I'm sure Nicholas Chugg will get that out very quickly. So look, it's fun. I love doing it, and I don't see the point of giving up.
I like it. I think it's so important for people to understand, because so many people are working to retire, but when you find...
I'm very lucky that I've got a lot of brilliant young people
around you
who work for me. I mean, Susan Heyman came to work with me 19 years ago, just after I'd started Chugg Entertainment and left Gadinsky. And she's now running the whole Frontier thing. And I'm very proud of that. And when Michael and I did the JV, all my team came, and they're all now in major positions in the whole Frontier Chugg touring thing, and I'm very proud of that.
Yeah.
And I've got, building teams of kids and, giving them a shot at the industry. I see, seen a lot of great people in this industry been screwed over by egomaniac record company chairman and I won't name any names, but and they get out of the industry, and it's been a great problem for me to watch all these great people
leaving the industry.
And and I always, even going back to I suppose it was the early 80s, late 70s, early 80s, I started to employ mainly women.
Yep.
And, of course, Chugg Entertainment, I think I had 2 men in a team of 16.
Yep.
Because I really loved working with women.
Yep.
And still do. And so Michael could see what was going on. And, I mean, Frontier's about, I don't know, probably 80% female, 20% males. And I like to see that. And I think now, you've got a female running Sony Music van. You've got Annabelle Hurd running ARIA. Women are starting to get into major positions in our industry.
Which is awesome.
It is awesome. And, they don't necessarily get it right, but...
None of us do, as you've said. We've all failed forward.
Yeah. So, look, it's a lot of fun. And, it's not as though it's the only thing in my life. I mean,
Mate, you're an avid bloody football NRL supporter.
Well, AFL, NRL.
Cyclist.
Yeah, well, I love setting up. I mean, that May to August period, I don't go to bed before 2 a.m.
Just watching cycling.
And, I got up, even though I had to fly here today, I basically went to bed about 12:30, got up at 1:30 to watch the playoff for third place.
Are you watching the one tonight?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
And I'll have 4 hours sleep and go back to Sydney in the morning. I'm a lunatic.
Yeah.
But I love sport, and I love when Ash Barty won the Australian Open, I sat in front of the TV and cried, not a problem.
Still remember when Steve Waugh retired. I remember crying for that when he got the double centuries in that.
That was really, there's been a lot of magic moments in sport. I mean, the first time we ever got TV in Tasmania was the first thing on television in Tasmania was the Melbourne Olympics.
Fuck. Yeah, right.
Yeah. And we had a TV, and all the kids, all my friends would come 2 miles away from their houses to watch.
Yep.
Dad'd come home and get the shits because 20 of the kids
mates were watching the...
Yeah, and we'd go out in the backyard and recreate all the events.
Yeah. I think you need to definitely write another book, have another book coming out, because there's so much we could talk for.
Yeah, well, it's pretty good that there's... Yeah, well, we could. I mean, I went to Melbourne. They're making a documentary movie on Michael.
Are they?
Yeah, and I flew down to Melbourne 2 weeks ago now, and we did it in the back room at the Esplanade down on St Kilda Beach.
Yep. 5
hours.
Jesus.
I bet most of it hits the cutting room floor, but once you get started.
You can, you've been in the music industry alone for, 5 decades, right?
Mm-hmm. More. 6. It's more. It's 60 years now.
Fuck.
Yeah, well, hopefully Amanda Pellman will stop globetrotting and come home and we can actually I wouldn't mind doing an audio book.
Yep.
I could do that. The podcasts, I knock a lot of them back, but
I appreciate you coming on.
I've done
one.
a few. Yeah, well, you know, you're yeah.
I appreciate it. We've got a bloody Christmas party to get to, but
Fuck, it's 4 o'clock already.
Yeah.
You're right. I want to go and get changed.
Yeah, but Chugg, I do truly appreciate you coming on. It's been unreal, and you've been incredible. Thank you.
A pleasure.
Thank you for listening to the Man That Can Project podcast. My name is Lachlan Stuart, and I hope you enjoyed this episode and found it helpful. If you did, please take a moment to rate and review the Man That Can Project on your favourite podcast platform. And don't forget to subscribe to stay up to date with our newest episodes. We'll see you again next time.